There's someone in your life who triggers you like no one else. Someone whose very existence makes your blood boil. Someone who pushes your buttons so perfectly, it's almost like they were designed to drive you insane. Here's what Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, discovered about that person: they're not your enemy. They're your teacher. I know what you're thinking. Absolutely not. That person is toxic, selfish, manipulative. They're everything wrong with the world. But what if I told you that reaction, that certainty, is exactly what Jung was talking about? What if the person who triggers you most is showing you something about yourself you've been desperate to avoid? What if they're not the problem at all? Here's the question that will change everything: what if the person who triggers you most is actually your greatest teacher? In the next 20 minutes, I'll show you exactly what they're trying to teach you. And when we're done, you'll never see conflict the same way again. So, think of that person right now. Feel that irritation. Hold on to that reaction, because we're coming back to this exact moment. And when we do, everything about it will have changed. You know that feeling, don't you? That instant surge of irritation when someone cuts you off in traffic. The flash of anger when a colleague takes credit for your idea. That visceral disgust when you see someone being fake on social media. Your body tenses. Your jaw clenches. And in that moment, you're absolutely certain they're the problem. But what if I told you that Carl Jung discovered something that will fundamentally change how you see every conflict in your life? What if that person who just triggered you isn't your enemy at all? What if they're showing you something about yourself you've been desperately trying to hide? I know what you're thinking, not me. I know myself pretty well. That's exactly what Jung thought, too, until he made a discovery that shattered everything he believed about human nature. Here's what Jung uncovered, and it's going to sting. Every time you have a strong emotional reaction to someone else's behavior, you're not actually reacting to them. You're reacting to a part of yourself that you've buried so deep, you don't even know it exists. Jung called this projection, and it's not just a psychological theory, it's a fundamental law of human experience, as predictable as gravity. Think about it. Why doesn't everyone trigger you equally? Why do certain behaviors make your blood boil while others barely register? The person who pushes your buttons isn't pushing random ones. They're pushing your buttons, buttons that exist because of something inside you. Jung discovered that other people function like mirrors, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we refuse to see. That arrogant boss, that attention-seeking friend, that manipulative family member, they're all showing you aspects of your own personality that you've rejected, denied, or cast into what Jung called the shadow. And here's the kicker: the stronger your reaction, the more accurate the mirror. The person who irritates you most isn't your opposite. They're your reflection. Now, I know this sounds impossible. You're probably thinking, but I would never act like that person. And that's precisely why this discovery is so powerful, and so hidden from us. Jung realized that we don't just hide our flaws from others, we hide them from ourselves so completely that we genuinely believe they don't exist. We craft what he called a persona, a carefully constructed mask of who we think we should be. But underneath that mask, there's a whole other you, one that contains everything you've ever rejected about yourself. Everything you've deemed unacceptable, shameful, or simply not me. And that hidden you is about to teach you the most important lesson of your life. So, if that mirror is showing you parts of yourself you don't recognize, the obvious question becomes, how much of yourself are you actually hiding? Jung's answer will shock you. We actively deny and repress roughly 90% of who we really are. 90%. Think about that for a moment. Picture an iceberg floating in the ocean. What you see above the surface, that tiny tip, is your conscious personality, your carefully crafted persona, the version of yourself you present to the world and even to yourself. But underneath the waterline, there's this massive hidden structure that dwarfs everything visible. Jung called this hidden part the shadow. It contains everything you've ever rejected, denied, or deemed unacceptable about yourself. Here's what's terrifying, that hidden 90 doesn't just disappear because you ignore it. It's still there, still active, still influencing every decision you make. You just can't see it. How does this happen? How do we lose 90 of ourselves? It starts early. Picture a 5-year-old child, pure, authentic, expressing every emotion without filter. They're angry when angry, sad when sad, selfish when they want something, generous when they feel giving. Then the conditioning begins. Good boys don't get angry. Nice girls don't take up space. Smart kids don't ask stupid questions. Strong people don't cry. Every time you heard these messages from parents, teachers, or society, you made an unconscious decision. You took parts of your authentic self and buried them alive. You learned that love and acceptance came with conditions, and those conditions required you to disown pieces of your soul. Jung discovered that we don't just hide our flaws, we construct an entire false identity to compensate. He called this the persona, from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. Your persona is your social mask, who you think you need to be loved, accepted, or successful. The responsible one. The nice one. The strong one. The smart one. The spiritual one. And here's the devastating truth, the more perfect your persona, the more violent your shadow becomes. Because for every trait you claim in your persona, you're actively rejecting its opposite in your shadow. Say you pride yourself on being always positive, your shadow contains all your suppressed rage, sadness, and despair. Claim to be totally honest? Your shadow holds every lie you've ever told yourself. Present as completely selfless? Your shadow seethes with unacknowledged selfish desires. This is where that mirror becomes crystal clear. Your shadow doesn't stay buried, it projects outward onto other people. You literally see your disowned qualities in others and react with disgust, anger, or judgment. Remember that person who triggered you at the beginning? That wasn't random. Your psyche was recognizing something familiar, a part of yourself you've exiled so completely that you can only see it out there in someone else. Jung proved this with a simple observation: we judge most harshly in others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The traits that trigger us most intensely are the ones we've worked hardest to deny in our own personalities. Now, you might be thinking, okay, maybe I've hidden some negative traits, but isn't that good? Shouldn't we suppress our worst impulses? Here's where Jung's discovery gets even more shocking. The shadow doesn't just contain what we think of as bad qualities. It contains anything that doesn't fit our persona, including some of our greatest gifts, our most powerful potentials, our most brilliant light. You haven't just been hiding your darkness from the world. You've been hiding your gold. And that changes everything about what we thought we knew about human potential. Because if 90 of you is hidden, and some of that hidden material is pure gold, what else might that mirror be trying to show you? But here's where Jung's discovery becomes truly staggering. This shadow projection isn't just happening to you as an individual. It's happening to entire societies, cultures, and nations, all unconsciously projecting their collective darkness onto the other. Once you see this pattern, you'll never view human conflict the same way again. Jung realized that just as individuals have personal shadows, groups develop what he called a collective shadow, all the traits, behaviors, and impulses a society deems unacceptable, projected onto other groups. Every culture has an image of itself as fundamentally good, moral, and civilized. But what happens to all the violence, greed, corruption, and hatred within that culture? It doesn't disappear, it gets projected outward onto the enemy, other races, religions, political parties, or nations. They become containers for everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Look at Nazi Germany, an entire nation convinced itself that Jewish people embodied all the greed, manipulation, and moral corruption that the Germans themselves possessed but couldn't face. The Holocaust wasn't just genocide, it was collective shadow projection on an industrial scale. Or consider apartheid South Africa, where white settlers projected their own violence and savagery onto black populations while stealing land and oppressing communities. Jung warned that collective shadow projection makes war inevitable. A society that cannot face its own darkness will always need someone else to carry it. But here's what's terrifying, we're doing this right now, in real time. Turn on any news channel or scroll through social media. Watch how each political side projects their collective shadow onto the other. Conservatives see liberals as the embodiment of moral decay and social destruction. Liberals see conservatives as the source of hatred and ignorance. Neither side can acknowledge that they contain the very qualities they're condemning. The mirror is working perfectly, each side is showing the other exactly what they refuse to see in themselves. And here's Jung's most chilling observation, the more a society denies its shadow, the more violently it projects. The more pure we claim to be, the more demonic our enemies become. Jung couldn't have imagined social media, but he would have recognized it instantly as the perfect shadow projection machine, algorithms designed to trigger emotional reactions, echo chambers that reinforce our projections, and 24/7 streams of outrage that keep us focused on their darkness instead of our own. Media and propaganda don't create the shadow, they activate it, amplifying our unconscious projections until entire populations are caught in collective possession, convinced the enemy out there is the source of all evil. But remember that mirror principle, if other people are mirrors for our individual shadow, then other groups are mirrors for our collective shadow. Every enemy we create is showing us something about ourselves we're desperate not to see. And perhaps the most devastating example is how we treat our environment. We've projected our own destructiveness onto nature itself, seeing it as something to conquer and dominate. We've made the earth the container for our collective greed and violence while maintaining the persona of being civilized and advanced. Climate change isn't just environmental destruction, it's our collective shadow coming home to roost. The planet is reflecting back exactly what we've been doing, consuming, destroying, taking without giving back. Now, you might be thinking, this is overwhelming. How can I deal with collective shadow projection when entire societies are caught in it? Here's Jung's revolutionary insight, the collective shadow is made up of individual shadows. Every personal projection contributes to the larger pattern. Every time you blame them, instead of looking at yourself, you're feeding the system. But that also means every time you withdraw a projection, every time you see your own darkness in that mirror instead of condemning it in others, you're healing not just yourself, but the whole. And this brings us to something Jung discovered that will completely revolutionize how you see your own potential. Remember when I said you've been hiding 90 of yourself? Here's the plot twist Jung discovered, the one that changes everything about human potential. You haven't just been exiling your darkness. You've been exiling your light. Jung called this the golden shadow, the positive qualities, talents, and potentials we admire in others but have completely disowned in ourselves. These aren't character flaws we're projecting, these are our greatest gifts, our most brilliant capacities, our deepest wisdom, all buried alive because they didn't fit the narrow persona we learned was acceptable. Think about someone you deeply admire. Picture them. What qualities make you feel inspired, or maybe a little envious? Their confidence, creativity, ability to speak truth, natural leadership, artistic talent. Here's Jung's shocking discovery, you're not admiring those qualities because they're foreign to you. You're recognizing them because they exist within you, locked away in your golden shadow. How does this happen? How do we exile our own brilliance? The same way we exile everything else, through cultural conditioning that teaches us what's appropriate for people like us. Picture a little girl who's naturally assertive, who speaks her mind and takes up space. What does she hear? Good girls are quiet. Nice girls don't argue. Pretty girls don't intimidate. So she locks away her natural leadership, admiring it only in others while convinced she could never possess it. Or imagine a sensitive boy who feels deeply, with natural empathy and intuitive understanding of emotions. His conditioning? Real men don't cry. Strong boys don't show weakness. Successful men don't let emotions interfere. So he buries his emotional intelligence, spending his life admiring it in others while cut off from his own profound capacity for connection. Jung understood that gender roles are some of the most violent destroyers of human potential. Societies create narrow boxes for what men and women are allowed to be, and anything that doesn't fit gets exiled to the shadow. Women are taught to exile their ambition, anger, competitive drive, and intellectual authority, admiring these in others while believing they're not that type. Men are conditioned to exile their vulnerability, intuition, artistic sensitivity, and nurturing capacity, projecting these onto women while remaining cut off from their own emotional genius. The tragedy? These aren't gender-specific traits, they're human traits every person possesses, but most never access because they've been taught these gifts belong to someone else. This is why the mirror principle is so crucial. When you feel inspired by someone, when you put them on a pedestal, you're often seeing your own golden shadow reflected back. The musician you idolize? They're showing your unexpressed creativity. The leader you admire? They're reflecting your buried leadership. The wise teacher? They're mirroring wisdom that already exists within you, but you've convinced yourself you don't possess. Jung proved this with a simple observation: we can only recognize in others what we already contain within ourselves. If you didn't have that creative spark, you wouldn't recognize true artistry. If you lacked inner wisdom, you couldn't identify it in others. And this isn't just individual, it's cultural. Entire societies exile certain qualities to maintain their collective persona. Western cultures have largely exiled intuition, spirituality, and emotional wisdom to uphold rationality and science. Eastern cultures have often exiled individual assertiveness and innovation for harmony and tradition. But notice, Western societies become fascinated with Eastern spirituality and mindfulness. Eastern societies are drawn to Western entrepreneurship and individualism. Each culture projects its golden shadow onto the other, never realizing these qualities exist within their own people, waiting to be reclaimed. Now, here's where this gets revolutionary. If your triggers show you both your dark shadow and your golden shadow, if every person who affects you strongly is a mirror for disowned parts of yourself, then every relationship becomes a treasure map. That person who triggered you at the beginning? They might not just be showing what you've rejected, they might be showing what you've failed to claim. But here's the question that changes everything. If 90 of your potential is locked away in the shadow, both dark and golden, what would happen if you started bringing it back home? What if you stopped seeing triggers as enemies and started seeing them as teachers pointing to the lost pieces of your soul? So, how do you bring home 90 of yourself? How do you reclaim both the darkness and the gold you've been projecting onto others for decades? Jung discovered that shadow integration isn't just therapeutic, it's the most radical act of self-liberation possible. But it requires something most people fear: stop being the victim of your reactions and become the author of your transformation. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you actually are, instead of who you think you should be. And here's what's beautiful: every trigger, every projection, every person who pushes your buttons is your psyche guiding you back to wholeness. Your unconscious mind constantly tries to show you what you've lost. Every strong reaction is a homing beacon pointing to a disowned part of yourself that wants to come home. That arrogant person irritating you? They might reflect the healthy confidence you buried under false humility. The colleague with emotional outbursts? They could mirror the authentic feelings you've suppressed for years. But here's the paradoxical and profound part: you integrate your shadow not by changing or fixing it, but by accepting it exactly as it is. This goes against everything we've been taught about personal development. We're told to overcome flaws, eliminate negatives, become better versions of ourselves. But Jung proved this strengthens the shadow, based on the same rejection that created it. Shadow integration means saying to those warring parts, "You belong here. You're part of me. I don't have to act on you, but I won't pretend you don't exist." When you stop fighting yourself, something miraculous happens. The energy used to suppress these parts becomes available for creativity, authentic expression, and living fully. Jung observed that people who integrate their shadow experience explosive increases in creativity, vitality, and innovation, because they're no longer wasting psychic energy on internal locks. Think of a river dammed up for years. Remove the dam, and all that energy rushes through with tremendous force. Shadow integration removes your internal dams. People report feeling more alive, authentic, capable of risks and truth-speaking. They stop apologizing for existing. They access creativity they never knew. They become magnetic, no longer hiding from themselves. This transforms every relationship. When you integrate your shadow, you stop projecting, so you see people as they are, not as screens for your unconscious. Triggers disappear, not from numbness, but from reclamation. That difficult family member? No longer difficult, because you're not projecting your patterns. That annoying coworker? Just another person, free of your disowned traits. But the most profound shift? Genuine compassion. You recognize everyone carries the same burden of disowned parts. You see their projections as signals of their own split, not attacks. And since individual shadows create collective ones, the reverse is true, every integrated shadow heals the collective. When you stop projecting darkness onto enemies, or gold onto heroes, you starve the cultural shadow system. You become what Jung called an individual, no longer possessed by unconscious patterns. This is how real social change happens, not by fighting externals, but by individuals.